The winter of 1943 brought darkness to the Arctic waters that stretched beyond human comprehension. Convoy operations had become the lifeline of the Allied war effort, threading through ice fields and submarine patrols with desperate regularity. Ships moved in clusters, their hulls groaning against the pressure of frozen seas, their crews watching horizons that blurred between sky and water. Radio operators hunched over their equipment in cramped chambers, tracking signals that bounced across hundreds of miles of empty ocean. Yet among these genuine convoys, something else emerged on the radar screens. Something that defied every known principle of naval warfare and human logic. Lieutenant Commander Raymond Kellner first noticed the anomaly on January 14, 1943, while stationed at a monitoring post on the northern coast of Iceland. His shift had been unremarkable until approximately 3 in the morning, when his radar screen illuminated with a formation that appeared roughly 60 nautical miles northeast of his position. The configuration suggested 12 vessels moving in standard convoy pattern, maintaining consistent speed and bearing. Kellner logged the contact and attempted radio communication. Silence answered him. He adjusted frequencies, cycling through every channel designated for Allied naval operations. The Phantom formation continued its southwestern trajectory, indifferent to his attempts at contact. Protocol demanded verification. Kellner contacted the nearest operational convoy, designated HX-7 Alpha, which was documented to be transiting significantly farther south. The convoy commander confirmed his position and reported no other Allied vessels in the vicinity. British Admiralty records showed no scheduled convoys in that sector for the entire week. Kellner stared at his screen as the 12 distinct contacts maintained their precise formation, moving with the discipline of experienced naval crews. He documented every detail: speed approximately 8 knots, spacing consistent with standard defensive pattern, course holding steady at 220 degrees. The contacts persisted for 47 minutes before vanishing simultaneously, as though a switch had been thrown. The incident might have been dismissed as equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference, common enough in Arctic conditions where magnetic anomalies played havoc with sensitive instruments. But Kellner was not the only observer. A Canadian listening post on Baffin Island, operated by signal specialist Corporal Donald Thériault, had detected similar contacts 3 nights earlier. Thériault's report described 9 vessels appearing on radar during a period of unusual atmospheric clarity. He had noted their formation, attempted contact, received no response. The vessels had maintained course for 32 minutes before disappearing. Thériault had filed his report with appropriate skepticism, noting possible equipment error or unusual propagation effects. When Kellner's report reached Naval Intelligence Headquarters in London, an analyst named Margaret Ashfield noticed the pattern. Ashfield had spent 18 months compiling data on convoy movements, U-boat activity, and signal intelligence across the North Atlantic. Her work demanded meticulous attention to detail and an ability to recognize anomalies within vast streams of information. She cross-referenced Kellner's observations with archived reports and discovered 4 additional incidents spanning back to November of 1942. Each incident shared common elements: multiple radar contacts appearing in sectors with no documented Allied presence, formations consistent with convoy procedures, complete radio silence, and sudden disappearance. Ashfield prepared a summary for her superiors, carefully noting the consistency of the reports while acknowledging numerous potential explanations. Radar technology remained relatively new, prone to errors and misinterpretations. Arctic atmospheric conditions created well-documented propagation anomalies. German naval forces might be employing sophisticated deception tactics. Yet something in the pattern troubled her. The contacts appeared too organized, too consistent with actual convoy procedures to be simple equipment malfunction. If these were German vessels, their behavior made no strategic sense. They maintained predictable courses, made no attempt at concealment, and never engaged in hostile actions. The British Admiralty responded with cautious interest. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical phase, with U-boat wolf packs inflicting devastating losses on convoy operations. Any unusual activity demanded investigation, regardless of how improbable it seemed. Rear Admiral Christopher Dunsworth, responsible for Northern Convoy coordination, ordered enhanced monitoring of the affected sectors. Additional radar installations received instructions to report any unidentified contacts immediately, with emphasis on detailed documentation and multi-station verification. February brought increased activity. On the night of February 7th, 3 separate monitoring stations detected the Phantom formation simultaneously. The Norwegian Coast Guard station at Hammerfest, the British installation on Jan Mayen Island, and a Free Polish naval unit operating from northern Scotland all reported multiple contacts moving in convoy formation through a sector designated as Zone Tango 4. The timing of the observations allowed for triangulation. Analysts calculated the formation's position with reasonable accuracy and determined it consisted of approximately 15 vessels moving at 9 knots on a southwesterly heading. A destroyer patrol operating 90 miles south of the calculated position received orders to investigate. HMS Resolute, under command of Commander James Fairmont, altered course and increased speed. The destroyer's crew prepared for potential contact with enemy forces, though the tactical situation seemed bizarre. German surface vessels rarely operated in those waters, and submarine formations would never present such obvious radar signatures. Fairmont maintained radio discipline as his ship plowed through moderate seas, radar operators scanning continuously for the reported contacts. Resolute reached the designated coordinates approximately 2 hours after the initial reports. The radar screen showed nothing but empty ocean. Fairmont ordered a search pattern, expanding outward in a standard grid. His crew scanned the horizon with binoculars, though visibility remained limited by darkness and scattered snow squalls. Radio operators monitored all frequencies, listening for any transmission that might indicate vessel presence. The destroyer maintained its search for 6 hours, covering over 200 square miles of ocean. They found nothing: no ships, no wreckage, no oil slicks, no signal traffic. The Phantom convoy had vanished as thoroughly as if it had never existed. Fairmont's report acknowledged the impossibility of the situation. Weather conditions had been moderate, visibility adequate for visual detection at reasonable range. His radar equipment had been functioning normally throughout the search. If 15 vessels had been present in that sector 2 hours earlier, as reported by 3 separate monitoring stations, they could not have simply disappeared. The maximum sustained speed of merchant vessels rarely exceeded 12 knots, and even at that rate, they could not have moved beyond his search radius in the available time. Enemy vessels would have no reason to maintain radio silence after detection, and friendly vessels should have responded to his queries. The Admiralty convened a working group to analyze the accumulating reports. Representatives from Signals Intelligence, Naval Operations, Meteorology, and Technical Services gathered in a secure facility in London to review every documented incident. They examined equipment specifications, maintenance records, atmospheric data, and operational logs. The technical experts acknowledged that radar technology remained imperfect, subject to various forms of interference and misinterpretation. Atmospheric ducts could create false returns. Electronic countermeasures might produce deceptive signals. Equipment malfunctions could generate phantom contacts, yet the consistency troubled them. Different operators using different equipment at different locations were reporting similar observations. The phantom contacts maintained realistic convoy formations and behaviors. Their appearance showed no correlation with known atmospheric conditions or equipment problems. If these were errors, they were remarkably systematic errors. If they were enemy deceptions, they served no apparent tactical purpose. The working group produced a cautious assessment acknowledging the phenomenon while emphasizing uncertainty about its nature and origin. Meanwhile, whispers began spreading through the naval community. Radar operators discussed the incidents during off-duty hours, sharing stories and theories. Some suggested German secret weapons, advanced technology designed to confuse Allied defenses. Others proposed natural phenomena, rare atmospheric effects that mimicked organized vessel formations. A few voices mentioned more exotic possibilities, drawing on folklore traditions that persisted even in the modern military. The Arctic seas held deep memories, stories of ghost ships and phantom vessels that predated electronic detection by centuries. Lieutenant William Harbridge, a signals intelligence officer stationed in Scotland, began collecting these informal accounts. Harbridge had trained as an anthropologist before the war, studying belief systems and collective narratives. He recognized the pattern of myth-making emerging around the phantom convoy reports. Sailors needed explanations for the inexplicable, narratives that could contain and domesticate the unknown. But Harbridge also recognized that folklore often preserved legitimate observations, encoding real phenomena in symbolic language. His investigation led him to historical accounts from earlier conflicts. Norwegian maritime records described unusual sightings dating back to the First World War. Russian naval archives, accessed through liaison channels, mentioned similar incidents from the Barents Sea. Even older accounts existed, preserved in shipping company logs and port authority documents. The specific details varied, but a common pattern emerged. Organized groups of vessels appearing on the edge of perception, maintaining formation briefly, then vanishing without explanation. Harbridge compiled his findings into an unofficial report that circulated among intelligence officers. He noted the psychological dimension of the phenomenon, acknowledging how stress and isolation could shape perception. Arctic conditions imposed severe mental strain on personnel. Darkness, cold, and constant danger created environments where misinterpretation and suggestion flourished. Yet he also argued that dismissing all reports as psychological error ignored the possibility of genuine anomalies. The Arctic remained poorly understood, its physical properties capable of producing effects that defied simple explanation. March brought the most dramatic incident. On March 23rd, a convoy designated SC-14 was transiting through the Denmark Strait when multiple vessels reported visual contact with another convoy formation. The sighting occurred during a rare period of clear weather, with visibility extending several miles. Lookouts aboard 6 different ships observed what appeared to be a column of vessels moving parallel to their course, approximately 5 miles distant. The formation maintained proper spacing and showed running lights appropriate for convoy operations. The convoy commodore, Captain Ernest Davison aboard the merchant vessel Strathmore, immediately attempted radio contact. His signals officer cycled through all designated frequencies, broadcasting identification requests. No response came. Davison ordered course adjustment to close the distance, intending to investigate the unidentified formation. His convoy altered heading by 15 degrees, maintaining formation as they approached the mysterious vessels. Other captains reported similar observations through the convoy radio net, confirming the visual contact. For approximately 20 minutes, both formations moved on converging courses. Lookouts reported counting between 10 and 14 vessels in the unknown convoy, though exact numbers varied. The distant ships maintained consistent spacing and speed, their lights clearly visible against the dark waters. Some observers reported seeing hull shapes, though details remained indistinct. Then, as SC-14 closed to within 3 miles, the other convoy simply faded. Witnesses described the lights dimming gradually, rather than extinguishing suddenly, as though the vessels were moving away at impossible speed. Within 5 minutes, the horizon stood empty. Davison ordered an immediate search of the area. His convoy spread into a screening line, covering the sector where the phantom formation had been observed. Radar showed nothing. Lookouts, scanning with binoculars, found empty ocean. The Commodore extended the search for 2 hours before resuming original course. His official report detailed the incident with careful precision, acknowledging the multiple witnesses while noting the absence of any physical evidence. He recommended thorough investigation while emphasizing his crew's reliability and experience. The SC-14 incident could not be easily dismissed. Too many witnesses had observed the phenomenon under good visibility conditions. The sighting had occurred during daylight hours rather than the darkness that characterized most previous reports. Multiple vessels had maintained visual contact simultaneously, eliminating simple equipment malfunction. The Admiralty's working group reconvened to assess this new data, finding themselves unable to provide satisfactory explanation. One analyst proposed a theory involving mirage effects. Arctic atmospheric conditions could create superior mirages, projecting images of distant objects above the horizon. Perhaps SC-14 had observed a mirage of another convoy actually located far beyond visual range, its image displaced by atmospheric refraction. The theory offered plausible mechanism consistent with known physics. Yet it failed to explain crucial details. Mirages typically produced distorted, unstable images. The observed convoy had maintained stable formation and realistic appearance. Mirage effects correlated with specific temperature profiles that had not existed during the sighting. Another theory suggested hallucination induced by ergot poisoning or similar contamination. Certain molds producing psychoactive compounds could theoretically affect multiple crew members who had consumed contaminated food. This explanation seemed far-fetched, requiring simultaneous contamination across several ships with different supply sources. Medical officers examined crews from SC-14, finding no evidence of poisoning or unusual medical conditions. The theory died quietly. German intelligence operations received serious consideration. Perhaps the enemy had developed sophisticated projection technology or electronic warfare capabilities that could create convincing false targets. Allied technical intelligence maintained extensive monitoring of German research programs, watching for advanced weapons development. No evidence suggested capabilities remotely approaching what would be required to produce the reported effects. Creating realistic phantom radar contacts might be theoretically possible through careful signal manipulation. Creating visual apparitions observed by multiple witnesses across miles of ocean exceeded any known technology. The working group's final assessment acknowledged the reality of the observations while declining to offer definitive explanation. They recommended continued monitoring and documentation, enhanced coordination between reporting stations, and immediate investigation of any future incidents. The assessment remained classified, shared only among personnel with operational need. Public discussion might compromise operational security or create unnecessary alarm. The Phantom Convoy became an official mystery, acknowledged but unexplained. April saw 3 more incidents, each following the now familiar pattern. Radar contacts appearing in sectors with no documented Allied presence, maintaining formation briefly, then vanishing. The reports accumulated in secure files, annotated with increasingly detailed technical analysis. Equipment checks revealed no systematic malfunctions. Atmospheric studies found no correlation between sightings and measurable conditions. The phenomenon persisted, indifferent to investigation or explanation. Some personnel began treating the Phantom Convoy as an inevitable feature of Arctic operations. Radar operators learned to recognize its characteristic signature, distinguishing it from genuine contacts through subtle differences in behavior and appearance. Informal protocols emerged for documenting sightings without excessive alarm. The mystery became normalized, integrated into operational routine. This adaptation troubled some officers who felt the phenomenon deserved more vigorous investigation. Others argued that resources should focus on genuine threats rather than inexplicable anomalies that posed no apparent danger. Lieutenant Commander Kellner, whose initial report had begun the documented sequence, continued monitoring from his Iceland station. He had logged 8 separate sightings over 4 months, each meticulously documented with radar scope photographs and detailed observations. Kellner developed theories he shared with colleagues during off-duty discussions. Perhaps the Phantom Convoy represented some unknown natural phenomenon, electromagnetic effects interacting with ice formations or ocean currents in ways not yet understood. Perhaps reality itself behaved differently in these extreme environments, creating temporary disruptions in normal causation. His speculation reflected broader questions emerging within the naval intelligence community. The war had demonstrated repeatedly that human knowledge remained incomplete, that nature and technology could produce surprises defying conventional wisdom. Radar itself had seemed almost magical when first deployed, revealing invisible aircraft and ships through mysterious means. Perhaps the Arctic held similar mysteries, phenomena awaiting proper understanding and explanation. The phantom convoy might represent a natural feature as yet unrecognized by science. By May of 1943, over 30 documented incidents filled intelligence files. The British Admiralty shared information with American and Soviet naval authorities through appropriate liaison channels. American officers expressed cautious interest, noting similar though less frequent reports from their own monitoring stations. Soviet representatives offered limited information, acknowledging unexplained radar contacts in northern waters, but providing few details. The phenomenon appeared widespread, not limited to British observations. The accumulating evidence began attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Academic scientists with security clearances requested access to the reports, seeing opportunities to study unusual phenomena under wartime conditions. Meteorologists wanted atmospheric data. Physicists proposed experiments to test various theories. Naval authorities generally declined these requests, maintaining that operational security prohibited wide dissemination. The Phantom Convoy remained a military secret, discussed only within restricted channels. Yet security measures could not prevent speculation and rumor from spreading. Sailors talked, sharing stories through the informal networks that connected naval personnel across bases and vessels. The Phantom Convoy acquired legendary status, becoming part of Arctic maritime folklore. Some crews considered sightings good luck, interpreting them as protective spirits watching over Allied operations. Others viewed them with superstitious dread, seeing omens of disaster. These emotional responses reflected the psychological strain of convoy duty, the constant tension of operating in hostile waters where death could arrive without warning. The spring thaw brought increased convoy activity as longer daylight hours and moderating weather enabled more aggressive operations. More ships meant more radar operators, more observers, more opportunities for detection. Sightings increased proportionally, maintaining the statistical pattern that had been established. Approximately one incident per week occurred somewhere across the monitored zones, each documented, analyzed, and filed. The Phantom Convoy had become a permanent feature of Arctic naval operations. The summer months of 1943 transformed Arctic operations in ways both predictable and strange. Extended daylight reduced the tactical advantage of darkness that U-boat commanders had exploited so effectively during winter months. Convoy routes shifted northward, taking advantage of clearer conditions while accepting increased risk from ice. The Phantom Convoy adapted to these changes, appearing with consistent frequency regardless of seasonal variations. If anything, the lengthened visibility periods made the phenomenon more perplexing rather than less. Commander Patricia Holloway arrived at the Admiralty's Northern Analysis Section in June, transferred from anti-submarine warfare coordination. Her assignment was unusual, reflecting the growing institutional concern about unexplained phenomena that consumed analysis resources without yielding actionable intelligence. Holloway brought a reputation for methodical thinking and resistance to premature conclusions. Her superiors wanted fresh perspective on the accumulated Phantom Convoy data, someone who could review the material without preconceptions shaped by months of inconclusive investigation. She spent 3 weeks reading every report, studying radar scope photographs, interviewing personnel who had witnessed the phenomenon directly. The volume of documentation impressed her. Over 60 separate incidents had been logged by mid-June, each with supporting technical data and witness statements. The consistency remained striking. Formations always consisted of between 8 and 16 apparent vessels. They maintained realistic convoy spacing and speed. They appeared primarily in designated zones stretching from Iceland to Novaya Zemlya. They never engaged in hostile actions or communications. They vanished without leaving physical evidence. Holloway noticed details that previous analysts had overlooked or underemphasized. The Phantom convoy never appeared during periods of active enemy contact. No U-boat attacks coincided with sightings. No German aircraft had been reported in the vicinity during incidents. This negative correlation seemed significant. If the phenomenon represented enemy deception operations, logic suggested it would accompany actual attacks, creating confusion to facilitate tactical advantage. Instead, the Phantom convoy seemed to avoid combat situations entirely. She also noted geographic patterns. Sightings clustered in specific areas rather than distributing randomly across Arctic waters. The Denmark Strait showed particularly high incident frequency. The waters northeast of Iceland produced regular reports. The Barents Sea approaches generated consistent observations. These zones shared common characteristics: extreme magnetic variation, unusual ocean current interactions, and frequent atmospheric instability. Holloway wondered if these physical features contributed to the phenomenon somehow. Her analysis led her to propose a research expedition specifically designed to investigate the Phantom convoy under controlled conditions. Rather than waiting for random sightings, she suggested positioning vessels and monitoring equipment in high-frequency zones during periods when historical data indicated increased likelihood of occurrence. The proposal met resistance from operational commanders, who viewed it as wasteful diversion of limited resources. Convoy protection required every available vessel. Chasing phantoms served no immediate military purpose. But Holloway persisted, arguing that understanding the phenomenon might yield insights into radar technology, atmospheric effects, or enemy capabilities. The Admiralty eventually approved a modest trial. A single corvette, HMS Primrose, received orders to conduct a 5-day patrol in the Denmark Strait area, equipped with enhanced radar systems and scientific observation equipment. The vessel carried additional personnel, including signal specialists, a meteorologist, and a physicist from Cambridge University who had obtained temporary military commission. Lieutenant David Brennan commanded Primrose, a veteran of 18 months convoy escort duty. He approached the assignment with professional skepticism, doubting that deliberate searching would succeed where chance encounters had produced only frustration. Nevertheless, he followed orders, establishing patrol pattern in the designated zone and maintaining continuous radar watch. His crew understood they were hunting something that might not exist, chasing shadows that had eluded explanation for months. The mission felt surreal, disconnected from the desperate warfare that surrounded them. The first 2 days produced nothing remarkable. Primrose traced methodical search patterns through empty waters, her radar sweeping endlessly across vacant screens. The scientific personnel monitored their instruments, recording atmospheric conditions, magnetic field variations, and ocean parameters. Dr. Edmund Haskell, the Cambridge physicist, spent hours studying radar principles and discussing technical possibilities with the signal specialists. He admitted frankly that conventional physics offered no obvious mechanism for the reported phenomena. On the third night, conditions changed. The meteorologist noted unusual atmospheric stability developing, with sharp temperature inversion, creating a distinct layer approximately 800 feet above sea level. Radar operators reported intermittent anomalies, brief contacts that appeared and faded unpredictably. Brennan increased alertness, ordering all observation stations to maintain maximum vigilance. The crew felt tension building, though nothing concrete justified the sensation. The Arctic night pressed around them, silent and vast. At 2300 hours, the radar screen illuminated with multiple contacts bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 40 miles. The operator called Brennan immediately, his voice carrying controlled excitement. The contacts showed classic Phantom convoy characteristics: multiple vessels in formation, consistent spacing, steady bearing. Brennan ordered course adjustment to intercept while the scientific team scrambled to their stations. This was the opportunity they had sought. Primrose increased speed, driving northeast toward the contacts. The radar signature remained stable, showing 11 distinct returns maintaining formation. Haskell monitored the radar equipment directly, confirming that the system was functioning normally and the contacts appeared genuine according to all technical parameters. The meteorologist noted that atmospheric conditions remained stable, the temperature inversion persisting. Radio operators broadcast standard identification challenges, receiving only silence in response. As the corvette closed range, visual lookouts strained to spot the phantom vessels. Visibility was reasonable despite darkness, perhaps 4 miles under the ambient light of Arctic summer night. At 20 miles range, Brennan reduced speed, approaching more cautiously. The contacts continued their southwesterly course, apparently unaware of or indifferent to Primrose's approach. At 15 miles, the formation altered course slightly, adjusting heading by approximately 10 degrees. The movement appeared deliberate, coordinated, exactly as real convoy would respond to navigation requirements. Haskell proposed launching illumination flares when they reached visual range, hoping to capture photographic evidence. Brennan approved the plan while maintaining approach. The physicist prepared camera equipment, loading film and checking exposure settings. The signals specialists recorded continuous radar data, documenting every aspect of the contact's behavior. Everyone aboard felt the weight of potential breakthrough. Whatever explanation might emerge, they were closer to the phantom convoy than any previous investigation. At 8 miles range, something changed. The radar contacts began fading, their returns weakening progressively. Brennan ordered maximum speed, trying to close the gap before the phenomenon dissipated entirely. Primrose surged forward, her engines straining, but the fading continued inexorably. Within 5 minutes, the screen showed empty ocean once again. The formation had vanished, following the pattern documented dozens of times before. Visual lookouts reported nothing, the horizon remaining empty and dark. Brennan ordered immediate search of the area where the contacts had last appeared. Primrose crisscrossed the zone for 3 hours, scanning with radar and visual observation. They found nothing whatsoever. No vessels, no wreckage, no disturbance in the water. The phantom convoy had escaped investigation once again. The crew's excitement transformed into familiar frustration, the deflation of hopes raised and disappointed. Only the recorded radar data and instrument readings remained. Technical documentation of an encounter that had resolved nothing. Dr. Haskell analyzed the data aboard ship during the return voyage. The radar recordings showed clear, consistent returns throughout the encounter. The contacts had exhibited all characteristics of genuine surface vessels within the technical limits of detection. No obvious equipment malfunction had occurred. The atmospheric data showed the temperature inversion had persisted throughout the incident, though Haskell could not identify any mechanism by which such conditions might produce false radar contacts. His preliminary report acknowledged the observations while declining to offer explanation. The phenomenon remained as mysterious as before. Commander Holloway received the expedition results with mixed feelings. The mission had succeeded in documenting a phantom convoy encounter with unprecedented detail, yet the additional data provided no clear answers. The phenomenon was demonstrably real within the limits of radar detection and qualified observation, but its nature and origin remained completely obscure. She expanded her investigation, requesting access to historical records from earlier conflicts and peacetime shipping operations. The archives yielded unexpected material. Lloyd's of London maintained extensive shipping records dating back over 2 centuries. Within these volumes, Holloway discovered scattered reports describing unusual sightings in Arctic waters. An 1874 entry documented a whaling vessel encountering what appeared to be a steam-powered convoy far beyond any known shipping routes. The captain had logged detailed observations, noting the vessel's maintained formation despite rough seas and showed no response to signals. The whaler had attempted to approach but lost contact after approximately 30 minutes. Earlier accounts existed in Norwegian and Russian maritime records. An 1823 report from a Norwegian fishing fleet described encountering organized vessel formation in the Barents Sea during winter. The fishermen had observed the mysterious ships for over an hour before weather closed in. When visibility cleared, the formation had vanished. Similar accounts appeared sporadically throughout the 19th century, too infrequent to establish clear patterns, but consistent enough to suggest recurring phenomenon. Most intriguing were references Holloway found in much older sources. Icelandic sagas mentioned fleet of ships that appeared during storms, sailing routes where no vessels should exist. The descriptions used mythological language, attributing the phantom fleet to supernatural beings or dead sailors. But beneath the folkloric interpretation, Holloway recognized familiar details: organized formations, mysterious appearances, sudden disappearances. The phenomenon might extend back centuries, predating modern technology entirely. This historical dimension troubled her analysis. If the phantom convoy appeared before radar existed, before steam power, before organized naval convoys as military practice, then modern explanations involving technology or warfare seemed inadequate. The phenomenon appeared independent of human activity, following its own logic across generations. Perhaps it represented natural occurrence that humans had interpreted differently across time periods, attributing it to gods, ghosts, or secret weapons depending on cultural context. She briefed the Admiralty Working Group on her findings, presenting the historical material alongside contemporary reports. The reception was skeptical. Senior officers distrusted information drawn from folklore and ancient documents. They wanted explanations grounded in verifiable science and military intelligence. One captain dismissed the historical accounts as superstition irrelevant to modern analysis. Others argued that even if some phenomenon had occurred historically, it bore no necessary relationship to current radar contacts. But a minority found the historical dimension compelling. If the phantom convoy predated modern warfare, it removed German deception operations from consideration. If similar sightings had occurred for centuries, the phenomenon represented enduring feature of Arctic maritime environment rather than temporary anomaly. This perspective suggested entirely different investigative approach, focusing on natural sciences rather than military intelligence. Understanding the phantom convoy might require physicists, meteorologists, and oceanographers rather than naval analysts. The summer of 1943 progressed with continued sightings at established frequency. Each incident added to the documentation without providing breakthrough understanding. Personnel throughout the Arctic monitoring network had learned to recognize and report the phenomenon according to standard procedures. The phantom convoy had become normalized, an accepted part of operational reality that generated paperwork but little alarm. This normalization concerned some officers who felt the mystery deserved more aggressive investigation. Resources and attention had shifted back to immediate combat requirements. In August, an incident occurred that renewed institutional interest. A Soviet destroyer operating in the Barents Sea encountered the phantom convoy under circumstances that enabled extended observation. The Soviet vessel had been conducting patrol operations when radar operators detected large formation bearing north-northwest, range 35 miles. The destroyer's captain, identified in subsequent liaison reports only as Kapitan Sokolov, ordered pursuit. Unlike previous encounters, the Soviet vessel managed to maintain radar contact for over 90 minutes. Sokolov's crew observed the formation alter course twice during this period, executing coordinated turns that demonstrated organized command structure. The phantom vessels maintained speeds varying between 7 and 10 knots, consistent with merchant convoy under moderate sea conditions. Soviet radio operators monitored all frequencies, detecting no communications between the phantom vessels despite their coordinated movements. As the destroyer closed to 15 miles, Sokolov ordered his forward gun crews to prepare illumination rounds, intending to light the area when visual range was achieved. Before he could execute this plan, the formation altered course directly toward his vessel. The movement was sudden and decisive, the entire group turning 90 degrees and increasing speed. Sokolov faced a tactical dilemma. If these were genuine vessels, they might be German warships executing aggressive maneuver, but their radar signatures remained consistent with merchant vessels throughout the encounter. He maintained course while ordering battle stations, preparing for potential combat while hoping for peaceful resolution. The opposing formations closed at combined speed exceeding 25 knots. At 8 miles range, with visual contact imminent, the Phantom convoy executed another coordinated turn, resuming original heading. Sokolov ordered his vessel to match the maneuver, attempting to maintain contact, but the Phantom formation began accelerating, showing speeds that exceeded any realistic merchant vessel capability. Sokolov's destroyer gave chase, pushing engines to maximum output. The gap continued opening. Within 20 minutes, radar contact was lost entirely. Soviet Naval Headquarters forwarded a summary of this incident to British liaison officers in Murmansk. The report acknowledged the unusual nature of the encounter while maintaining careful neutrality about potential explanations. Soviet analysis had considered various possibilities, including atmospheric effects, equipment errors, and German naval operations. No conclusion had been reached. The British received this information with great interest, recognizing that the Soviet experience validated their own observations while providing new details about the Phantom convoy's behavior. The incident suggested the phenomenon possessed something resembling awareness or responsiveness. The Phantom formation had appeared to react to Sokolov's approach, executing maneuvers that seemed deliberately designed to avoid close contact. This behavioral dimension had not been clearly documented in previous encounters. Most sightings involved the Phantom convoy maintaining steady course, indifferent to observation. The Soviet experience suggested more complex interaction between observers and observed. Commander Holloway added the Soviet report to her growing case file, now containing over 80 documented incidents. Patterns continued emerging from the accumulated data. The Phantom convoy never allowed close approach by investigating vessels. It appeared most frequently during periods of moderate weather rather than extreme conditions. It showed preference for specific geographic zones. It demonstrated coordination and organized behavior inconsistent with natural phenomena, but also inconsistent with known human operations. Every answer generated new questions. September brought the first multiple simultaneous sightings. On September 19th, 3 separate monitoring stations detected Phantom convoy formations at the same time in different locations. The Norwegian station at Hammerfest reported contacts bearing northeast. The British installation on Jan Mayen Island detected a formation to the west. A Canadian radar post on Greenland's east coast observed contacts to the south. The timing was synchronized within 5-minute window, suggesting coordinated phenomenon rather than isolated incidents. This simultaneity created impossible situation. The 3 observation points were separated by hundreds of miles. No single convoy formation could produce radar returns at all 3 locations simultaneously. Either multiple Phantom convoys existed, operating in coordination, or the phenomenon involved something beyond simple vessel movements. Analysts struggled with the implications. Multiple formations suggested organized activity on scale that defied explanation. Alternative mechanisms involving radar propagation or atmospheric effects seemed equally inadequate. Holloway proposed that the Phantom convoy might not represent vessels at all in conventional sense. Perhaps radar operators were detecting something else entirely, some phenomenon that produced signatures resembling organized ship formations. This radical suggestion met resistance from personnel who had witnessed the phenomenon both on radar and visually. They had seen the lights, observed the formations through binoculars, tracked coordinated movements. Whatever explanation might emerge, it had to account for both radar returns and visual observations. Dr. Haskell, still attached to the analysis effort after his expedition aboard Primrose, suggested parallel investigation into theoretical physics. Recent developments in quantum mechanics had revealed unexpected behaviors at fundamental levels of reality. Perhaps similar principles operated at larger scales under extreme conditions. The Arctic environment was unique, combining intense magnetic fields, unusual atmospheric properties, and extreme temperatures. These factors might enable physical processes unknown in temperate regions. His speculation attracted interest from academic physicists who followed the investigation through security-cleared channels. Several proposed experiments that might test exotic hypotheses involving electromagnetic fields, atmospheric plasma, or quantum effects. The proposals remained theoretical, requiring resources and conditions impossible to achieve during wartime. But they suggested avenues for future research, frameworks that might eventually explain the inexplicable. Meanwhile, operational personnel continued their duties, documenting phantom convoy sightings when they occurred while maintaining focus on genuine threats. The phenomenon had become part of Arctic routine, strange but apparently harmless. Some crews developed superstitious practices around sightings, viewing them as luck indicators or spiritual omens. Others treated the phantom convoy with humor, inventing stories and jokes that relieved tension during long patrols. These informal responses reflected human need to domesticate the unknown, to transform mystery into manageable narrative. Lieutenant Commander Kellner, still monitoring from Iceland, had logged his 23rd sighting by October. He had spent more hours observing the phantom convoy than perhaps anyone else in the Allied forces. The repeated encounters had transformed his perspective from analytical detachment to something approaching familiarity. He recognized subtle variations in the phenomenon's behavior, noting that formations sometimes appeared more distinct, while other times seemed hazy and uncertain. He documented these variations meticulously, hoping someone might eventually discern patterns within the mystery. His observations led him to unexpected conclusions. The phantom convoy seemed to behave almost like living organism, responding to environmental conditions in ways that suggested adaptation or awareness. When weather was clear and observation conditions favorable, the formations appeared briefly before vanishing. During poor visibility or equipment malfunctions, they sometimes persisted longer. This inverse relationship between observation capability and phenomenon duration suggested something deliberately avoiding clear detection. Kellner shared this theory cautiously, knowing it bordered on speculation beyond his analytical mandate. October brought winter back to Arctic waters. Darkness returned, reclaiming the high latitudes from summer's constant light. Convoy operations adjusted to renewed challenges of storm season and extended nights. U-boat activity increased as German submarine commanders exploited favorable tactical conditions. The war's grinding calculus continued, measuring success in vessels delivered versus vessels lost. Within this harsh context, the phantom convoy maintained its presence, appearing regularly despite changing seasons and intensifying combat. The winter of 1943 descended with particular ferocity across the Arctic theater. Storm systems swept down from the polar cap, generating waves that towered above convoy decks and winds that turned spray into instant ice. Convoy operations during these months demanded extraordinary endurance from crews who battled elements as dangerous as any enemy action. Ships disappeared beneath waves, succumbed to ice accumulation that capsized them through sheer weight, or simply vanished into darkness without explanation. The phantom convoy continued its appearances throughout this brutal season, indifferent to conditions that challenged human survival. Commander Holloway had compiled what amounted to the most comprehensive documentation of an unexplained phenomenon in modern naval history. Her files contained over 100 separate incident reports spanning 13 months, each supported by technical data, witness statements, and analytical commentary. The material represented thousands of hours of observation and analysis by trained personnel using sophisticated equipment. Yet no consensus explanation had emerged. The phantom convoy remained as mysterious in December as it had been when Kellner first logged his observation in January. Pressure mounted within the Admiralty to either solve the mystery or abandon the investigation. Senior officers questioned the continued allocation of analysis resources to a phenomenon that posed no apparent threat and yielded no actionable intelligence. The war demanded focus on tangible enemies and concrete problems. Phantom vessels that harmed no one and influenced no battles seemed luxury concern during desperate conflict. Several voices advocated classifying the accumulated documentation and terminating active investigation, preserving the material for potential post-war academic study. Holloway resisted this conclusion, arguing that premature abandonment would waste the substantial investment already made. She proposed one final major effort: a coordinated observation campaign involving multiple vessels, aircraft reconnaissance, and enhanced monitoring equipment positioned throughout high-frequency zones. If this concentrated effort failed to produce breakthrough understanding, she would accept that current technology and knowledge were insufficient. The phenomenon could be archived for future investigation when better tools became available. The Admiralty approved a limited version of her proposal. Resources remained scarce, but the institutional investment in the mystery had generated sufficient momentum to justify one comprehensive attempt. In January of 1944, Operation Spectral commenced with deployment of 3 corvettes, 2 submarines, and 4 monitoring stations equipped with experimental radar systems. Additionally, weather reconnaissance aircraft received instructions to investigate any phantom convoy reports occurring during their patrol sectors. The operation would run for 6 weeks, representing the maximum commitment that operational demands permitted. Lieutenant Brennan again commanded one of the surface vessels, HMS Primrose, assigned to the Denmark Strait Patrol Zone. The corvette carried enhanced crew including Dr. Haskell, who had remained attached to the investigation, and a Norwegian specialist named Henrik Johansen, who possessed extensive knowledge of Arctic maritime folklore and traditional navigation. Johansen's inclusion reflected Holloway's willingness to explore unconventional perspectives. If the phantom convoy connected to historical phenomena, indigenous knowledge might provide insights that formal analysis had missed. The operation's first week produced routine results: standard patrols through empty waters, continuous monitoring that detected nothing unusual. Personnel aboard the assigned vessels maintained discipline despite the anticlimactic nature of the mission. They understood their role in comprehensive scientific investigation, even if that investigation concerned phenomena their training had never prepared them to analyze. The waiting itself became exercise in military patience, the ability to maintain readiness during extended periods of inactivity. On January the 12th, a Canadian monitoring station on Greenland detected phantom convoy formation approximately 70 miles offshore. The duty officer followed established protocol, immediately notifying coordination headquarters while maintaining detailed observation. The contacts showed 13 vessels in standard formation, heading southwesterly at 8 knots. Weather conditions were moderate, with partial cloud cover and light winds. A weather reconnaissance aircraft operating from Iceland received orders to investigate, vectoring toward the reported position at maximum speed. The aircraft, a Catalina flying boat piloted by squadron leader Thomas Whitmore, reached the designated coordinates within 40 minutes. Whitmore descended to 1,000 feet, establishing visual search pattern over the sector where phantom convoy had been detected. His crew scanned the ocean surface through observation windows, searching for any sign of vessel activity. The radar operator monitored his equipment, attempting to acquire contact with the reported formation. For 20 minutes they searched, finding nothing but gray water stretching endlessly below. Then the radar operator called contact. Multiple returns appeared on his screen, bearing 180 degrees, range 12 miles. Whitmore altered course immediately, descending to 500 feet for better visual observation. The Catalina drove south, her crew straining to spot the phantom vessels. At 6 miles range, visual contact was established. Whitmore saw them clearly. A formation of ships maintaining precise spacing, their wakes visible as white lines against dark water. He counted 11 vessels, slightly fewer than the radar showed, but close enough given observation conditions. The squadron leader initiated approach, intending to overfly the formation at low altitude. His crew prepared cameras to document the sighting photographically, finally capturing visual evidence that had eluded all previous investigations. Whitmore felt adrenaline surge as his aircraft closed the distance. Whatever these vessels were, genuine or phantom, they would be recorded on film within minutes. The Catalina roared toward the formation at 180 miles per hour, cameras ready, observers positioned. At 2 miles range, something extraordinary occurred. The vessels began fading, their visual appearance diminishing while radar contacts weakened simultaneously. Whitmore pushed his aircraft faster, trying to reach the formation before it vanished completely. But the dissolution continued inexorably. Within 90 seconds, the ocean below showed nothing but empty water. The radar screen displayed vacant sea. The phantom convoy had evaded documentation once again, disappearing literally before their eyes. Whitmore circled the area repeatedly, searching desperately for any trace of the formation he had clearly observed. His crew confirmed the sighting, multiple witnesses agreeing on details. They had seen ships, real solid vessels with visible structure and wakes. Yet those ships had simply ceased existing when approached. The squadron leader radioed his report immediately, describing the encounter with careful attention to detail. His voice carried frustration that all previous observers had experienced. Absolute certainty of observation combined with complete absence of physical evidence. HMS Primrose received orders to investigate the same area, though several hours would be required to reach the position. Brennan increased speed, driving his corvette toward the Greenland coast while his crew prepared for potential contact. Dr. Haskell monitored equipment, checking calibrations and discussing technical possibilities with the signal specialists. Johansen stood on the bridge, studying the horizon with experienced eyes. He had spent 20 years on Arctic waters before the war, accumulating knowledge that combined practical seamanship with traditional law. The Norwegian specialist shared observations that troubled Brennan. Johansen described conversations with fishermen and whalers who spoke of phantom vessels as established feature of northern waters. These traditional mariners possessed detailed knowledge of where and when sightings were most likely, passed down through generations. They described the phantom ships with consistent details, organized formations, mysterious appearances, sudden vanishings. Most significantly, they claimed the phenomenon responded to human attention, becoming more elusive when actively pursued. Brennan asked whether traditional knowledge suggested explanations. Johansen offered several possibilities drawn from folklore. Some believed the phantom vessels were spirits of drowned sailors, endlessly sailing routes they had followed in life. Others attributed the phenomenon to natural forces not yet understood by science, mysterious properties of Arctic environment that created temporary disruptions in normal reality. A few voices spoke of doorways between worlds, suggesting the phantom vessels came from elsewhere, appearing briefly in human realm before returning to their own domain. The commander dismissed supernatural explanations while acknowledging that folklore might preserve legitimate observations. If traditional mariners had documented the phenomenon for generations, their accumulated knowledge deserved consideration regardless of theoretical framework. Perhaps patterns existed in the traditional accounts that formal analysis had overlooked. Johansen agreed to compile a systematic summary of folklore knowledge, organizing the material for comparison with modern documentation. Primrose reached the search area after nightfall, establishing patrol pattern where Whitmore had observed the phantom formation. The corvette's radar swept continuously, monitoring for any contacts. Hours passed without result. Brennan maintained the search through the night and following day, extending his patrol beyond initially assigned duration. The phantom convoy did not reappear. Only empty ocean surrounded them, vast and indifferent to human searching. Other vessels assigned to Operation Spectral conducted similar patrols throughout their designated zones. The submarines maintained submerged positions in high-frequency areas, listening with hydrophones for any acoustic signatures that might indicate vessel presence. The monitoring stations scanned continuously, their radar operators watching for characteristic contacts. 2 weeks elapsed with minimal activity. Personnel began experiencing the deflation that accompanied failed expectations, the letdown when dramatic plans produce mundane results. On January the 26th, both submarines reported unusual acoustic contacts within hours of each other. HMS Seawolf, positioned northeast of Iceland, detected propeller sounds indicating multiple vessels transiting nearby. The submarine surfaced to investigate, finding empty ocean despite clear acoustic evidence that ships had recently passed. HMS Tactician, operating in the Barents Sea approaches, reported similar experience. Strong acoustic contacts that corresponded to no visual or radar detection. These submarine reports suggested new dimension to the phenomenon. If the Phantom convoy produced acoustic signatures detectable by hydrophones, it possessed physical properties that generated sound waves through water. This observation challenged theories involving optical illusions or radar anomalies. Sound propagation required actual mechanical disturbance, physical presence creating pressure waves. Yet the submarines found nothing when they investigated, no vessels corresponding to the detected sounds. Dr. Haskell found the acoustic data particularly significant. Sound traveled through water according to well-understood physical principles. False acoustic contacts were extremely rare, far less common than radar anomalies or visual misidentifications. If multiple submarines were detecting propeller sounds where no vessels existed, the phenomenon involved actual physical processes rather than purely perceptual effects. Something was disturbing the water, creating acoustic signatures consistent with ship propellers, even though no ships could be found. He proposed that the Phantom convoy might represent temporary manifestation of matter or energy, appearing briefly in detectable form before dissolving back into undetectable state. This hypothesis sounded fantastic, bordering on science fiction, but quantum physics had already demonstrated that matter could behave in non-intuitive ways at small scales. Perhaps similar principles operated differently under Arctic conditions, enabling temporary materialization of organized structures. The theory remained purely speculative, lacking any mechanism or supporting evidence, but it represented an attempt to reconcile contradictory observations. February brought the operation's most dramatic incident. On February 8th, HMS Primrose and the submarine HMS Seawolf both detected Phantom convoy formation simultaneously from different positions. Primrose's radar showed 14 contacts bearing 090 degrees, range 28 miles. Seawolf, submerged 12 miles north of those contacts, detected strong acoustic signatures indicating multiple vessels nearby. Coordination Headquarters immediately ordered both units to converge on the formation, attempting to trap it between surface and subsurface observation. Brennan increased speed while Seawolf's commander, Lieutenant Gerald Mackenzie, maneuvered his submarine to intercept position. The coordination was imperfect, hampered by communication delays and positional uncertainties, but for the first time investigators had the Phantom convoy bracketed between two platforms. Brennan's crew reached action stations while maintaining radar contact. Mackenzie brought his submarine to periscope depth, preparing to observe the formation visually. The converging approach succeeded initially. Primrose maintained solid radar contact while closing range. Seawolf's hydrophones tracked propeller sounds with increasing clarity, confirming multiple vessels in formation. Mackenzie raised his periscope, scanning the surface for visual contact. He observed the formation clearly. 12 ships maintaining organized spacing, proceeding steadily through moderate seas. The submarine commander called ranges and bearings, while his crew documented every detail. Primrose closed to 15 miles, maintaining maximum speed. Brennan could see on his radar screen that the Phantom formation lay directly ahead, with Seawolf positioned slightly to the north. The convergence was working. They were achieving coordinated observation from surface and subsurface platforms, exactly as Operation Spectral had planned. Victory seemed imminent, breakthrough understanding within reach. Then, everything collapsed simultaneously. Primrose's radar contacts faded completely within 30 seconds. Seawolf's acoustic signatures ceased abruptly, the hydrophones detecting only ambient ocean noise. Mackenzie, still observing through his periscope, watched the surface vessels simply vanish, their solid forms dissolving into empty water. Both British units found themselves converging on vacant ocean. The Phantom convoy escaped once again. The coordinated failure devastated morale among Operation Spectral personnel. They had achieved perfect setup, trapped the phenomenon between multiple observation platforms, and still it had evaded documentation. The incident seemed almost mocking, as though the phantom convoy possessed awareness of the investigation and deliberately frustrated attempts at understanding. Rational analysis suggested coincidental timing, random dissolution occurring precisely when observation conditions were optimal. But emotional response suggested something more disturbing: intelligence, purpose, deliberate evasion. Brennan and Mackenzie met aboard Primrose to compare observations and discuss implications. Both officers were experienced professionals, accustomed to dealing with concrete tactical problems. The phantom convoy challenged their fundamental assumptions about maritime operations and physical reality. They had seen the phenomenon with their own eyes, detected it with multiple independent systems, and watched it vanish impossibly. Professional training demanded skepticism about extraordinary claims, yet their direct experience left no room for doubt. Mackenzie described what he had observed through the periscope. The vessels appeared solid and real, showing all characteristics of actual ships. He had distinguished hull structures, observed masts and superstructures, noted proper spacing between vessels. Everything suggested genuine convoy until the moment of disappearance. Then the ships had faded rapidly, their outlines becoming transparent before vanishing completely. The dissolution had occurred simultaneously across the entire formation, as though controlled by single command. This coordinated vanishing troubled both officers. Individual ships disappearing might be explained through various mechanisms, however exotic. But simultaneous dissolution of 12 separate vessels suggested organization, coordination, perhaps intelligence. They were observing something that behaved with purpose rather than natural randomness. The implication unsettled them deeply. Purpose implied agency, and agency implied entities capable of deliberate action. What sort of entities could manifest and dissolve organized ship formations across Arctic waters? Operation Spectral concluded in mid-February, with results that satisfied no one. The coordinated effort had produced unprecedented documentation, including simultaneous radar, acoustic, and visual observations from multiple platforms. Yet this wealth of data yielded no coherent explanation. The phantom convoy had been detected, tracked, observed, and lost repeatedly. Every investigation ended identically: empty ocean where vessels had clearly existed moments before. Commander Holloway compiled a final assessment acknowledging both the reality of the phenomenon and the complete failure to explain it. Her report circulated through restricted channels, reaching senior officers and select government officials. The document presented detailed chronology of over 130 documented incidents, technical analysis of detection methods and equipment performance, summaries of proposed theories and their inadequacies. Holloway concluded that the phantom convoy represented genuine phenomenon requiring explanation, but that current scientific understanding and available technology were insufficient to provide one. She recommended archiving the investigation for future study while maintaining routine documentation of any continued sightings. The Admiralty accepted this recommendation with evident relief. The phantom convoy had consumed analysis resources, generated endless speculation, and produced no actionable results. Senior commanders preferred to focus institutional attention on tangible threats that could be engaged and defeated through conventional means. German U-boats, surface raiders, and aircraft posed clear dangers, requiring clear responses. Mysterious radar contacts that harmed no one deserved lower priority, regardless of their enigmatic nature. The investigation was officially suspended, though reporting protocols remained in effect. But closing an official investigation could not erase the phenomenon or the questions it raised. Personnel throughout Arctic operations continued observing phantom convoy appearances at consistent frequency. Radar operators logged contacts according to established procedures. Ship captains reported sightings in routine communications. The mystery persisted as operational reality even after formal investigation ceased. Some officers maintained private interest in the subject, collecting information informally and discussing theories during off-duty hours. The Phantom Convoy had entered institutional consciousness permanently. Lieutenant Commander Kellner remained at his Iceland post, continuing to monitor and document every sighting that occurred within his detection range. By March of 1944, he had logged 41 separate observations, more than any other individual operator. The accumulated experience had given him intuitive sense for the phenomenon's patterns and behaviors. He could often predict when conditions seemed favorable for appearance, though his predictions remained imperfect. The Phantom Convoy followed rules he could sense but not articulate or understand. Dr. Haskell returned to Cambridge in April, resuming academic duties while maintaining security clearance for continued access to Phantom Convoy documentation. His wartime experience had transformed his research interests, shifting focus toward anomalous physical phenomena and the limits of conventional scientific explanation. He began corresponding with colleagues in various disciplines, carefully discussing the Phantom Convoy within security constraints, seeking perspectives that might illuminate the mystery. Most responses offered conventional explanations he had already considered and rejected. A few acknowledged that nature might hold surprises beyond current theoretical frameworks. One correspondent proved particularly insightful. Professor Anton Bergström, a Swedish physicist working in neutral Stockholm, had published theoretical papers exploring unusual electromagnetic effects in polar regions. Bergström proposed that extreme magnetic field configurations combined with specific atmospheric conditions might enable temporary coherence of ionized particles, creating structures that could persist briefly before dissipating. His mathematics suggested such structures might reflect radar waves and even produce visual apparitions under proper circumstances. The theory remained highly speculative and had attracted little attention from mainstream physics community. Haskell obtained permission to share limited Phantom Convoy data with Bergström through diplomatic channels. The Swedish physicist analyzed the information with great interest, finding patterns that seemed consistent with his theoretical framework. The geographic distribution of sightings correlated with regions of maximum magnetic field complexity. Timing of incidents showed weak correlation with solar activity levels. Formation behaviors might represent particle coherence responding to electromagnetic field configurations. Bergström suggested that the Phantom Convoy could be naturally occurring plasma phenomenon, organized by magnetic and atmospheric forces into shapes that resembled ship formations. This explanation offered plausible physical mechanism grounded in legitimate science. Plasma physics was a relatively new field, with many unexplored possibilities. Arctic conditions combined factors that might enable exotic plasma behaviors unknown in temperate regions. Bergström's theory could explain radar returns, visual appearances, acoustic signatures, and sudden disappearances through single coherent framework. Haskell found the proposal compelling enough to forward to Commander Holloway, suggesting it deserved serious consideration despite the suspended investigation. Holloway reviewed Bergström's work with cautious interest. The plasma theory addressed many observed features of the Phantom Convoy phenomenon, but it struggled with certain details. Plasma structures would likely show variability and instability inconsistent with the precise formations documented in reports. Natural plasma phenomena would not be expected to maintain organized spacing and coordinated movements over extended periods. The theory worked better for explaining brief transient effects rather than sustained observations lasting 30 minutes or longer. Nevertheless, it represented most scientifically rigorous explanation proposed to date. She prepared supplementary analysis incorporating Bergström's theoretical framework, attaching it to the archived investigation files. Future researchers would find both empirical documentation and theoretical interpretation available for consideration. Holloway recognized that solving the Phantom Convoy mystery might require decades and advances in multiple scientific disciplines. Her generation had documented the phenomenon thoroughly. Subsequent generations might achieve understanding that currently remained beyond reach. This long-term perspective provided some consolation for the investigation's failure to produce immediate answers. Meanwhile, the war ground forward through 1944. Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Western Europe, concentrating resources and attention on the coming offensive. Arctic convoy operations continued as vital supply line to Soviet forces, but the strategic focus had shifted southward. The Battle of the Atlantic reached its decisive phase as improved tactics and technology turned the tide against German U-boats. Victory became imaginable where previously only survival had seemed possible. Within this larger narrative, the Phantom Convoy represented minor footnote, curious mystery subordinate to vast military drama. Yet for those who had encountered the phenomenon directly, it remained profoundly significant. Brennan, Mackenzie, Kellner, Whitmore, and dozens of others carried memories of experiences that challenged their understanding of reality. They had witnessed organized ship formations that should not exist, tracked vessels that vanished impossibly, participated in investigations that yielded no rational conclusions. These experiences could not be easily dismissed or forgotten. They persisted as persistent questions in minds trained to seek concrete answers. Some found comfort in Bergstrom's plasma theory, accepting it as adequate explanation, even if details remained unclear. Others remained skeptical, feeling that natural phenomena could not account for the organized, apparently purposeful behaviors they had observed. A few embraced supernatural or exotic interpretations, suggesting the Phantom Convoy represented something beyond current scientific framework entirely. These divergent responses reflected broader human reactions to mystery, the drive to explain versus the willingness to accept inexplicable. Henrik Johansen, the Norwegian specialist who had joined Operation Spectral, compiled his summary of traditional maritime folklore regarding phantom vessels. The document ran to over 80 pages, containing accounts spanning 4 centuries. He organized the material geographically and chronologically, identifying patterns in the traditional narratives. The folklore described phantom ships appearing most frequently during transitional periods. Dawn and dusk, equinoxes, storms giving way to calm. Sightings clustered in specific areas that aligned remarkably well with modern high-frequency zones. Traditional mariners had developed practices for responding to phantom ship encounters, mostly involving respectful distance and avoidance of direct interaction. Most intriguingly, the folklore suggested that phantom vessels responded to human attention and intention. Multiple accounts described formations that vanished when approached aggressively, but persisted when observed passively. Some traditional narratives claimed that speaking about phantom ships while at sea increased likelihood of encountering them, as though discussion attracted their attention. Others warned against attempting to board or signal phantom vessels, describing disasters that befell crews who violated this prohibition. These behavioral guidelines might be pure superstition, or they might preserve legitimate observations about phenomenon's response patterns. Johansen forwarded his compilation to Holloway, suggesting that traditional knowledge deserved more systematic analysis. The folklore represented accumulated empirical observations spanning far longer than modern scientific investigation. While the theoretical frameworks were supernatural rather than scientific, the underlying observations might be accurate. Perhaps investigating the Phantom Convoy required combining traditional knowledge with modern technique, respecting both empirical wisdom and theoretical rigor. Holloway found this perspective refreshing after months of fruitless technical analysis. Summer of 1944 brought the D-Day landings and opening of the Second Front. The strategic landscape transformed as Allied armies established themselves in France and began pushing eastward. Soviet forces advanced from the opposite direction, grinding through German defensive positions at enormous cost. The war's outcome, uncertain for so long, became increasingly inevitable. Within this context of massive military operations involving millions of personnel, the Phantom Convoy seemed trivial, a curiosity of interest only to those directly involved. Yet the phenomenon continued unchanged. Monitoring stations logged sightings throughout the summer months with depressing regularity. The Phantom Convoy appeared, maintained formation briefly, and vanished according to patterns that had become grimly familiar. Radar operators recognized its characteristic signature immediately, distinguishing it from genuine contacts through subtle differences in behavior. The mystery had been normalized through repetition, transformed from extraordinary anomaly into routine occurrence. This normalization troubled some observers who felt that familiarity had bred inappropriate complacency. In August, an American destroyer escort operating in the Denmark Strait encountered the Phantom convoy under circumstances that enabled extended observation. USS Kendrick, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Robert Dalton, detected multiple radar contacts while conducting anti-submarine patrol. Dalton ordered investigation, approaching the formation with standard caution. His crew observed the Phantom vessels both on radar and visually for over 40 minutes, the longest sustained contact documented to that point. Dalton maintained detailed log of the encounter, noting every observable detail. The American commander described precise formation keeping that impressed him as experienced naval officer. The Phantom vessels maintained exact spacing despite moderate seas that would normally cause some position variation. They executed course changes with coordination that suggested sophisticated command and control. Their speed remained absolutely constant, showing none of the minor fluctuations typical of mechanical propulsion. Everything about their behavior suggested disciplined naval operation, yet they responded to no communications and allowed no close approach. When Kendrick closed to within 5 miles, the formation executed rapid acceleration that no merchant convoy could achieve, opening the range before vanishing entirely. Dalton's report reached American naval intelligence, which shared it with British counterparts through established liaison channels. The American observation added to the accumulated documentation without changing fundamental conclusions. The Phantom convoy remained unexplained regardless of how many qualified observers documented its characteristics. Some analysts began suggesting that explanation might be impossible in principle, that certain phenomena might exist beyond human capacity for understanding. This philosophical position represented admission of defeat, acknowledging mystery that could not be resolved through investigation and analysis. Commander Holloway rejected this defeatism. She maintained that sufficient data combined with proper theoretical framework would eventually yield explanation. The problem was not inherent inexplicability, but rather inadequate tools and understanding. Future generations with better technology and more advanced science would solve mysteries that baffled current investigation. This optimistic perspective sustained her continued interest in the phenomenon despite official suspension of active investigation. She maintained her files, corresponded with interested parties, and awaited developments that might provide breakthrough insight. Autumn of 1944 brought intensified German resistance as Allied armies approached the Reich's borders. The war entered its final brutal phase, characterized by desperate defensive fighting and massive casualties. Arctic convoy operations continued with reduced frequency as Soviet forces gained capability to sustain themselves through recaptured territory. The strategic importance of northern supply routes diminished even as the Phantom convoy maintained its mysterious presence. History was moving toward resolution while the enigma remained stubbornly unresolved. In November, a Soviet cruiser reported extraordinary encounter in the Kara Sea. The vessel, identified in liaison reports as Kirov, detected large Phantom formation and attempted to engage it with illumination rounds. Soviet gunners fired star shells over the reported position, flooding the area with intense light. For approximately 3 minutes, the Phantom vessels were clearly visible under artificial illumination, their forms distinct and solid. Dozens of Soviet crew members observed the formation, some capturing sketches of what they saw. Then, despite continuous illumination, the vessels faded and vanished, dissolving while still brilliantly lit. This incident demolished theories based on optical illusions or visibility conditions. The Phantom convoy had been observed under intense artificial lighting, eliminating any possibility of misidentification due to darkness or poor visibility. The Soviet crew had seen solid vessel forms that disappeared despite optimal observation conditions. The incident suggested that whatever mechanism enabled the phenomenon, it operated independent of lighting or atmospheric factors. Physical presence could somehow cease regardless of observational advantages. The implications were deeply troubling for anyone seeking rational explanation. The winter of 1944 marked the beginning of Germany's final collapse. Soviet armies drove westward with relentless momentum while Allied forces pushed from the opposite direction. The Third Reich's territory contracted steadily as military defeat became undeniable reality. Within this context of approaching victory, Arctic operations diminished in strategic importance. Convoy traffic decreased as alternative supply routes opened through liberated territories. The Phantom Convoy, however, showed no corresponding reduction in activity. It appeared with the same frequency as always, indifferent to human warfare and its outcomes. Lieutenant Commander Kellner received orders transferring him to administrative duties in London during January of 1945. After 24 months monitoring Arctic waters from Iceland, his intimate familiarity with the Phantom Convoy phenomenon was being redirected toward other purposes. The transfer felt like abandonment of unfinished work. He had documented 63 separate sightings, accumulated more direct observation time than any other individual, developed intuitive understanding of the phenomenon's patterns. Yet this expertise was being discarded because official interest had evaporated. The war's approaching conclusion rendered mysteries subordinate to practical concerns of occupation and reconstruction. Before departing Iceland, Kellner compiled a comprehensive personal memoir of his Phantom Convoy experiences. The document was unofficial, written for his own records rather than military purposes. He described each significant sighting in detail, recorded his evolving thoughts about the phenomenon, and speculated freely about possible explanations. The memoir reflected his journey from skeptical technical operator to someone who had witnessed too much to dismiss the inexplicable. He concluded that the Phantom Convoy represented something genuinely anomalous, a phenomenon that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality and required explanation beyond current scientific frameworks. His final observation from Iceland occurred on January the 19th, just 3 days before his departure. The Phantom formation appeared during evening hours, showing 15 distinct contacts on radar. Kellner tracked the formation for 38 minutes, watching its steady progress across his screen with mixture of familiarity and continued bewilderment. He had seen this pattern dozens of times, yet it remained as mysterious as during his first encounter 2 years earlier. The contacts maintained perfect formation until they vanished simultaneously, leaving his screen empty. Kellner logged the observation with his customary precision, completing his final entry in the documentation that had defined his wartime service. In London, he joined Commander Holloway's section, which had expanded to handle post-war planning for naval intelligence operations. The Phantom Convoy investigation remained officially suspended, but Holloway maintained her files and continued receiving reports from monitoring stations still operating in Arctic waters. She welcomed Kellner's expertise, recognizing that his direct experience complemented her analytical perspective. Together, they represented institutional memory of the investigation, the keepers of knowledge that official channels had chosen to ignore. Their work during early 1945 focused primarily on preparing materials for post-war scientific investigation. Holloway believed strongly that peace would enable academic research impossible during wartime. Universities and research institutions would have access to resources and personnel currently committed to military operations. The Phantom Convoy documentation could be shared with qualified scientists representing multiple disciplines. Fresh perspectives might identify patterns or explanations that had eluded military analysis. She wanted comprehensive materials ready for distribution once security classifications could be relaxed. Kellner contributed detailed technical analysis based on his extensive observation experience. He identified subtle variations in the phenomenon's behavior that less experienced operators might overlook. Some phantom formations showed slightly different radar characteristics than others, suggesting possible subtypes or variations. Appearance frequency varied seasonally in ways not fully explained by weather patterns or operational tempo. Geographic clustering showed more complexity than simple high-frequency zones suggested. These nuanced observations might provide crucial clues for future investigators with proper scientific background. Dr. Haskell maintained contact with both officers, visiting London periodically to discuss theoretical developments. His correspondence with Professor Bergstrom had continued throughout the war years, exploring plasma physics and electromagnetic phenomena in greater depth. Bergstrom had refined his theoretical model, incorporating additional factors including Earth's magnetic field variations, solar-wind interactions, and ionospheric processes. The enhanced theory predicted that Arctic conditions might enable quasi-stable plasma structures lasting up to several hours under optimal circumstances. These structures could theoretically reflect electromagnetic radiation and even produce acoustic signatures through interaction with surrounding air and water. Yet Bergstrom's model still struggled with the organized, apparently purposeful behaviors documented in so many reports. Natural plasma phenomena should show random or semi-random variations, not precise formation keeping and coordinated maneuvers. The Swedish physicist acknowledged this limitation while arguing that complex electromagnetic fields might impose organizing principles not yet fully understood. Perhaps plasma structures could become trapped in magnetic field configurations that constrain their spatial distribution, creating appearance of deliberate formation. This was speculative, pushing beyond established physics, but it represented an attempt to reconcile theory with observation. In March of 1945, as Allied armies approached the Rhine and Soviet forces closed on Berlin, an extraordinary report arrived from a Norwegian fishing vessel operating in the Barents Sea. The fishing boat Havard, captained by an experienced seaman named Lars Endresen, had encountered the Phantom convoy under circumstances that enabled unprecedented observation. Endresen's crew had observed the formation for over 90 minutes during clear weather conditions, maintaining parallel course at distance of approximately 2 miles. The Norwegian fishermen had no military equipment or technical apparatus, only their eyes and traditional maritime knowledge. Endresen described the Phantom vessels with remarkable precision. He counted 13 ships maintaining formation that reminded him of wartime convoys he had observed throughout the conflict. The vessels appeared to be merchant ships of various sizes, showing characteristic profiles of cargo carriers. He noted specific details: smoke from funnels, visible superstructures, the bow waves created by their passage through water. Everything suggested genuine ships engaged in organized transit. His crew watched continuously, discussing what they were seeing, confirming details among themselves to ensure accurate observation. But Endresen also noted disturbing anomalies. The Phantom vessels showed no national markings or identification features despite being clearly visible at relatively close range. Their hulls appeared oddly uniform in color, lacking the weathering and variation typical of working ships. Most significantly, despite producing visible bow waves and wakes, they seemed to disturb the water less than their apparent size and speed should cause. The ocean surface around them looked subtly wrong, as though the ships were not quite solid despite their visual appearance. After watching for over an hour, Endresen decided to approach more closely, altering course to intercept the formation. His crew expressed reluctance, citing traditional prohibitions against approaching Phantom vessels. But the captain overrode their concerns, driven by curiosity and perhaps stubbornness. The fishing boat turned toward the Phantom convoy, closing range at modest speed. As the distance decreased below 1 mile, the Phantom vessels began fading. Endresen described the process as similar to objects disappearing into fog, though the weather remained clear. Within 5 minutes, the formation had vanished completely, leaving empty ocean where 13 ships had clearly existed moments before. The Norwegian report reached British intelligence through complicated routing involving Free Norwegian forces and diplomatic channels. Holloway recognized immediately that it provided crucial civilian perspective, observation by experienced maritime professionals lacking military training or preconceptions. Endresen's account matched military reports in essential details while providing additional nuances based on traditional seafaring knowledge. His observation about the Phantom vessels disturbing water less than expected seemed particularly significant, suggesting they possessed reduced physical substance despite visual appearance. She arranged to interview Endresen personally when his vessel visited a Scottish port in April. The Norwegian captain proved to be a thoughtful observer who chose words carefully and distinguished clearly between what he had seen directly versus his interpretations. He acknowledged the experience had shaken his understanding of natural world. After 40 years on Arctic waters, he thought he knew what was possible and impossible. The Phantom convoy had demonstrated that his knowledge was incomplete. He expressed interest in scientific explanation, but seemed comfortable accepting mystery if explanation proved elusive. Andresen shared traditional knowledge about phantom vessels that complemented Henrik Johansson's earlier folklore compilation. Norwegian maritime culture preserved detailed lore about such phenomena, passed down through generations of fishermen and whalers. The traditions described phantom ships as neither good nor evil, simply part of the Arctic environment, like ice and storms. Experienced mariners learned to recognize them and maintained respectful distance. Attempting to interact with phantom vessels was considered foolish and potentially dangerous, though the nature of the danger remained vague in traditional accounts. The captain mentioned one detail that sparked intense interest from Holloway and Kellner. Traditional lore suggested that phantom vessels appeared more frequently during periods when the boundary between sea and sky became uncertain, when fog or atmospheric conditions blurred the horizon. This observation correlated surprisingly well with meteorological data from documented sightings. Many incidents had occurred during periods of temperature inversion or unusual atmospheric stratification, conditions that created optical effects and complicated visual observation. Perhaps the Phantom convoy required or exploited specific atmospheric configurations, appearing when natural conditions enabled its manifestation. May brought Germany's surrender and end of the European War. The continent erupted in celebration, while military forces began complex transition from combat operations to occupation duties. Arctic convoy operations essentially ceased, eliminating the military justification for continued monitoring network. Radar stations began shutting down or transitioning to peacetime functions. The infrastructure that had enabled systematic Phantom convoy documentation was being dismantled. Future sightings would depend on chance encounters by merchant vessels or fishing boats lacking sophisticated detection equipment. Holloway accelerated her efforts to preserve the investigation materials and prepare them for post-war scientific access. She recognized that institutional memory would fade rapidly as wartime personnel demobilized and returned to civilian life. The Phantom convoy risked becoming forgotten mystery, its documentation buried in classified archives accessible to no one. She lobbied senior officers for authorization to declassify the materials or at least share them with appropriate academic institutions under restricted conditions. The responses were generally negative, citing security concerns and reluctance to release military intelligence materials regardless of their content. In June, she received unexpected assistance from an influential source. Lord Cherwell, the government's chief scientific advisor, learned about the Phantom convoy investigation through informal channels. Cherwell possessed strong interest in unexplained phenomena and maintained that scientific progress often emerged from investigating anomalies. He used his considerable influence to advocate for making the Phantom convoy documentation available to qualified researchers. While the materials remained classified, a select group of scientists received authorization to examine them under security restrictions. This limited access opened possibilities for serious academic investigation. Professor Bergstrom was among those granted access, traveling to London in July to review the complete documentation. He spent 3 weeks examining reports, studying technical data, and discussing observations with Holloway, Kellner, and other knowledgeable personnel. The Swedish physicist emerged from this intensive study both impressed and humbled. The phenomenon was more complex and better documented than he had realized from the limited information previously available. His plasma theory explained some aspects, but failed to account for others. He promised to continue developing his theoretical framework while acknowledging that complete explanation might require fundamental advances in physics. Other scientists who examined the materials proposed various alternative theories. A meteorologist suggested complex atmospheric refraction effects that might project images from distant locations, creating appearance of organized vessel formations. A psychologist proposed collective hallucination driven by stress and suggestion, arguing that expectation could shape perception among personnel operating in extreme conditions. A physicist specializing in electromagnetic phenomena suggested unknown interactions between radio waves and ionospheric conditions might create false radar returns with organized characteristics. None of these theories satisfied Holloway, who had spent over 2 years studying the phenomenon. Each explanation addressed some observations while failing to account for others. The most provocative theory came from an Oxford philosopher named Dr. Richard Sutherland, who approached the problem from an epistemological perspective rather than scientific one. Sutherland suggested that the phantom convoy might represent category error, human attempt to interpret something fundamentally different using familiar concepts like ships and convoys. Perhaps observers were detecting real phenomenon, but misinterpreting its nature completely. What appeared to be organized vessels might be something else entirely, something for which human language and conceptual frameworks lacked proper vocabulary. The phantom convoy might be as real as gravity or magnetism, but require entirely new conceptual framework for proper understanding. This philosophical approach resonated with Holloway's growing suspicion that conventional investigation methods were inadequate. The phantom convoy had been studied exhaustively using every available scientific and military technique. Qualified observers had documented it repeatedly under various conditions. Technical equipment had recorded its signatures consistently. Yet no explanation emerged that satisfied all observations. Perhaps the failure reflected not inadequate data, but inadequate conceptual frameworks. Understanding the phantom convoy might require thinking differently about reality itself, questioning assumptions so fundamental they usually escaped notice. August brought Japan's surrender and end of the Second World War. The global conflict that had dominated 6 years of human history concluded with atomic weapons demonstrating power that redefined strategic calculations. In this new atomic age, mysteries like the phantom convoy seemed both quaint and profound. If humans could harness energy from atomic nuclei, perhaps other natural phenomena existed beyond current understanding. The war had demonstrated repeatedly that reality exceeded human imagination. The phantom convoy represented another example of nature's capacity for surprise. As military forces demobilized and personnel returned to civilian life, the community of individuals who had directly encountered the phantom convoy dispersed. Radar operators, ship captains, signal specialists, and intelligence analysts scattered to various destinations, carrying their memories of unexplained phenomena witnessed during wartime service. Some maintained contact, corresponding about their shared experiences and discussing theories. Others deliberately left the mystery behind, focusing on rebuilding normal lives after years of conflict. The phantom convoy became part of their personal histories, private knowledge that might or might not find future expression. The years following the war's conclusion brought profound transformation to the Arctic region and its maritime operations. Commercial shipping resumed along routes that had been contested battlegrounds months earlier. Scientific expeditions ventured into waters previously too dangerous for civilian research. The technological infrastructure built for military purposes was gradually repurposed or abandoned. Within this changing landscape, reports of the phantom convoy continued, though with decreased frequency and institutional attention. The phenomenon persisted into peacetime, suggesting it had never been connected to warfare despite its prominence during the conflict years. Commander Holloway remained with naval intelligence through 1946, managing the transition of wartime operations to peacetime functions. She continued maintaining the phantom convoy files, adding occasional reports that reached her through various channels. Commercial vessels and fishing boats reported sightings periodically, their accounts matching the pattern established during military operations. The phenomenon showed no awareness that the war had ended, appearing according to its own mysterious schedule. Holloway documented each report with the same meticulous attention she had applied during active investigation, though she no longer commanded resources to pursue comprehensive analysis. In March of 1946, she received a report that would prove among the most significant in the entire documentation. A Soviet scientific vessel conducting oceanographic research in the Kara Sea had encountered the Phantom convoy under circumstances that enabled extended observation and measurement. The Soviet ship Sevastopol carried sophisticated scientific equipment including advanced radar systems, atmospheric monitoring instruments, and underwater acoustic sensors. When the Phantom formation appeared, the scientific crew activated all available equipment, capturing data far more comprehensive than anything obtained during wartime investigations. The Soviet report, shared through scientific cooperation channels that were beginning to open despite emerging Cold War tensions, described the encounter in remarkable detail. The Phantom convoy had appeared during afternoon hours with exceptional visibility. 15 vessels maintaining precise formation had materialized approximately 8 miles from Sevastopol's position. The Soviet scientists had observed them continuously for 72 minutes while recording multiple data streams. Radar showed solid contacts. Visual observation confirmed structured vessels. Acoustic sensors detected propeller signatures and engine sounds. Atmospheric instruments recorded unusual electromagnetic fluctuations coinciding with the Phantom convoy's presence. Most remarkably, the Sevastopol crew had attempted to approach within 1 mile of the formation, succeeding farther than any previous investigator. At close range, they observed details that earlier reports had missed or underemphasized. The Phantom vessels showed no wake turbulence beyond their immediate vicinity. The water around them appeared disturbed only within roughly 50 yards of each hull, beyond which the ocean surface remained undisturbed, as though the ships were not present. This limited zone of physical interaction suggested the vessels possessed some form of reduced material presence, affecting their immediate environment while leaving surrounding areas unaffected. The Soviet scientists also reported that the Phantom vessels appeared slightly translucent when observed from certain angles, as though their physical substance was incomplete or variable. This observation contradicted earlier reports describing solid, opaque vessels. But the Soviet crew maintained they had seen clearly. The ships were visible and structured, but somehow not entirely solid. When Sevastopol closed to approximately half a mile, the Phantom convoy executed coordinated turn away from the research vessel, maintaining distance with maneuver that demonstrated awareness of being approached. The formation then accelerated beyond any realistic speed for merchant vessels, opening range rapidly before vanishing entirely. The Soviet data provided crucial new information while deepening the mystery. The electromagnetic fluctuations detected during the encounter supported Bergstrom's plasma theory to some degree, suggesting unusual electromagnetic activity accompanied the phenomenon. But the organized behaviors, the apparent awareness, and the selective physical interaction defied explanation through natural plasma processes. The Soviet scientists concluded their report by acknowledging they had observed something real but inexplicable within current scientific frameworks. They recommended continued investigation using advanced equipment and multidisciplinary approaches. Holloway prepared a comprehensive analysis incorporating the Soviet findings with accumulated wartime documentation. The combined material represented the most complete record of anomalous phenomenon ever assembled by official sources. Over 200 separate incidents documented across 4 years, observed by hundreds of qualified personnel using military and scientific equipment, corroborated through independent sources including foreign governments. The phenomenon was undeniably real, whatever its nature might be. She distributed copies of her analysis to the select group of scientists who had received clearance, hoping someone would achieve breakthrough insight. Professor Bergstrom revised his theoretical model extensively based on the Soviet data. He proposed that the Phantom convoy might represent quasi-material structures formed through complex electromagnetic processes existing at boundary between energy and matter. Under specific Arctic conditions, ionospheric plasma might achieve temporary coherence that enabled it to interact with electromagnetic radiation and even produce limited physical effects. The organized appearance might result from magnetic field configurations that constrained plasma distribution into regular patterns. This remained highly speculative, extending beyond established physics, but it offered framework for understanding observations that seemed otherwise impossible. Dr. Haskell, now teaching at Cambridge and conducting research into atmospheric physics, developed complementary theory focusing on dimensional boundaries. He suggested that space itself might behave differently under extreme magnetic and atmospheric conditions, enabling temporary manifestations of structures that normally existed elsewhere. This elsewhere might be parallel dimension, distant location, or even different time period. The phantom convoy might be genuine vessels existing in normal fashion somewhere else, appearing briefly in Arctic waters through process involving spatial distortion or dimensional intersection. His theory sounded like science fiction, but drew on emerging concepts in theoretical physics regarding space-time geometry and quantum mechanics. The most unusual interpretation came from Dr. Richard Sutherland, the Oxford philosopher who had examined the wartime documentation. Sutherland proposed that the phantom convoy represented human consciousness interacting with quantum-level uncertainty in unusual ways. He suggested that observation itself might play a role in the phenomenon, that the act of monitoring and detecting somehow called the phantom convoy into existence. This interpretation drew on emerging discussions about quantum measurement and the role of observers in determining physical reality. Applied at macroscopic scale, these concepts suggested that human consciousness might interact with natural processes under extreme conditions, creating temporary manifestations that existed only while being observed. These diverse theories reflected the profound challenge the phantom convoy presented to conventional understanding. Scientists from different disciplines approached the mystery using their respective frameworks, each finding partial explanations that failed to account completely for all observations. The phenomenon seemed to exist at intersection of multiple fields: physics, meteorology, oceanography, psychology, philosophy. Perhaps comprehensive understanding required synthesis across disciplines, integration of perspectives that were usually kept separate. Or perhaps the phantom convoy would remain mysterious indefinitely, a permanent reminder of nature's capacity to exceed human comprehension. Lieutenant Commander Kellner left military service in late 1946, returning to civilian life in Edinburgh, where he had grown up. He found employment with a shipping company, using his wartime experience in maritime operations. The phantom convoy remained constant presence in his thoughts, mystery that had defined 3 years of his life. He maintained correspondence with Holloway and other investigators, following developments in the theoretical understanding, but he gradually accepted that he might never know what he had observed so many times from his Iceland monitoring station. Some mysteries might persist beyond human capacity for resolution. In 1948, Kellner received a letter from a Norwegian fisherman who had read newspaper article mentioning phantom vessels in Arctic waters. The fisherman, an elderly man named Olaf Christensen, described encountering similar phenomena throughout his 50-year career at sea. Christensen's grandfather had spoken of phantom ships, as had earlier generations. The tradition extended back beyond memory, preserved in stories and warnings passed from experienced mariners to newcomers. Christensen wrote that his people had learned to accept the phantom vessels as part of the Arctic environment, no more explainable than northern lights or the midnight sun, but equally real. This letter profoundly affected Kellner's perspective. He had approached the phantom convoy as technical problem requiring solution, mystery to be explained through analysis and investigation. But perhaps that framework was itself limiting. Indigenous knowledge and traditional maritime culture had coexisted with the phenomenon for generations without requiring complete explanation. They acknowledged its reality, respected its presence, and adapted to its existence without demanding theoretical understanding. This acceptance did not represent ignorance or resignation, but rather different relationship with mystery, recognizing that some aspects of reality might exceed explanation while still requiring practical accommodation. He shared Christensen's letter with Holloway, who found it equally thought-provoking. Her institutional role had ended with her retirement from naval service in 1947, but she maintained personal interest in the phantom convoy documentation. The letter suggested that Western scientific approach, with its emphasis on explanation and theoretical framework, might not be the only valid response to inexplicable phenomena. Traditional knowledge offered alternative model, Empirical observation without theoretical explanation, practical wisdom without comprehensive understanding. Perhaps future investigation should incorporate both approaches, combining scientific rigor with traditional acceptance of mystery. Commander Holloway died in 1951. Her passing noted in naval records and remembered by colleagues who had worked with her during wartime service. She left behind meticulously organized files containing the complete Phantom Convoy documentation, preserved for future investigators. Her final written statement about the phenomenon, composed shortly before her death, acknowledged both the reality of what had been observed and the failure to explain it. She expressed confidence that future generations with advanced technology and theoretical frameworks would eventually solve the mystery, but she accepted that she would not live to see that resolution. The 1950s brought Cold War tensions that transformed Arctic waters into contested frontier between superpowers. Military operations resumed with focus on strategic deterrence rather than convoy protection. Radar networks expanded enormously, monitoring for aircraft and missiles rather than surface vessels. Within this new strategic context, reports of the Phantom Convoy continued at low frequency. Operators occasionally logged unusual contacts that matched the documented pattern, but institutional interest remained minimal. The phenomenon had become historical curiosity, wartime mystery filed away in archives accessible to few researchers. Dr. Haskell continued investigating atmospheric and electromagnetic phenomena throughout the 1950s, publishing papers that occasionally referenced the Phantom Convoy obliquely without violating security restrictions. He maintained that Arctic conditions enabled physical processes not yet understood by mainstream science. His work attracted limited attention during his lifetime, but would later be recognized as prescient. He died in 1959, his research continuing through students who had absorbed his willingness to question conventional frameworks and investigate anomalies seriously. Professor Bergstrom published his comprehensive theoretical analysis of Arctic plasma phenomena in 1962. Presenting mathematical framework for understanding how electromagnetic processes might create quasi-material structures under extreme conditions. His work was largely ignored by mainstream physics community, but found audience among researchers interested in unusual natural phenomena. Bergstrom acknowledged that his theory remained incomplete, unable to account fully for organized behaviors and apparent purposefulness documented in Phantom Convoy reports. He suggested that future advances in plasma physics and electromagnetic theory might provide missing elements. The 1960s and 70s saw occasional newspaper articles and popular books mentioning the Phantom Convoy, usually in contexts emphasizing mystery and unexplained phenomena. These popular treatments generally lacked access to official documentation and relied on second-hand accounts and speculation. They transformed the phenomenon into folklore, embellishing basic facts with dramatic interpretations and unsupported theories. The serious investigation conducted during and after the war became buried beneath layers of sensationalism and pseudo-scientific speculation. True nature of the phenomenon remained obscure, hidden behind both official secrecy and popular distortion. In 1978, portions of the Phantom Convoy documentation were declassified as part of routine review of aging military intelligence materials. Researchers finally gained access to Holloway's files, including incident reports, technical analyses, and theoretical discussions. Academic papers began appearing that examined the phenomenon using historical documents combined with modern scientific understanding. These studies generally concluded that the Phantom Convoy represented complex natural phenomenon involving atmospheric, electromagnetic, and perhaps psychological factors. No consensus explanation emerged, but the declassification enabled serious scholarly investigation impossible during preceding decades. Lieutenant Commander Kellner lived until 1983, spending his final years in quiet retirement. He occasionally gave interviews to researchers investigating the Phantom Convoy, providing first-hand accounts of his wartime observations. He maintained that the phenomenon was completely real, not hallucination or equipment malfunction, but acknowledged he had never understood what he was observing. His detailed logs and personal memoir became valuable historical sources, preserving observational data from someone who had encountered the phenomenon more frequently than perhaps any other individual. The late 20th century brought technological advances that might have resolved the phantom convoy mystery if applied systematically. Satellite observation, advanced radar systems, sophisticated atmospheric sensors, and computer analysis could potentially capture and analyze the phenomenon with unprecedented detail. But institutional interest remained minimal. The Cold War's conclusion and subsequent strategic reorientations left little attention for investigating anomalous phenomena that posed no apparent threat. Commercial shipping used modern routes and navigation systems that generally avoided high-latitude waters where sightings had been most common. The Arctic became less traveled rather than more, reducing opportunities for encounters. Occasional reports continued reaching researchers through various channels. A Russian icebreaker crew reported sighting in 1992. A scientific expedition documented radar contacts in 1997. A fishing vessel observed formation in 2003. These modern reports matched historical patterns closely, suggesting the phenomenon persisted unchanged despite technological and social transformations. The phantom convoy appeared indifferent to human progress, maintaining its mysterious presence according to principles that remained obscure. Academic interest revived somewhat in the early 21st century as historical records became more accessible and interdisciplinary approaches gained acceptance. Researchers applied modern analytical techniques to wartime documentation, finding patterns and correlations that earlier investigators had missed. Geographic information systems revealed that sighting locations aligned with complex magnetic field configurations and ocean current interactions. Statistical analysis showed weak correlations with solar activity and ionospheric conditions. These findings supported Bergström's theoretical framework while acknowledging that many questions remained unanswered. The phantom convoy's ultimate significance might lie not in its physical nature, but in what it revealed about human relationship with mystery. Modern civilization emphasized explanation and understanding, treating unexplained phenomena as temporary problems awaiting solution through scientific investigation. But some mysteries might persist indefinitely, representing aspects of reality that exceeded human cognitive capacity or existed beyond current conceptual frameworks. The phantom convoy demonstrated that rigorous observation and careful documentation could establish phenomenon's reality without yielding explanation. This situation challenged assumptions about inevitable progress toward complete understanding. Traditional maritime cultures had maintained different relationship with such mysteries, acknowledging inexplicable phenomena as permanent features of their environment. They developed practical wisdom for coexisting with mystery without requiring theoretical explanation. This approach might represent valid alternative to scientific investigation, different way of relating to reality that accepted limits of human understanding. Perhaps the phantom convoy called for synthesis, scientific rigor combined with humble acceptance that nature might contain permanent mysteries, careful observation joined with philosophical comfort in the presence of inexplicable. The Arctic waters, where the phantom convoy appeared most frequently, remained among Earth's most challenging environments. Extreme in temperature, darkness, magnetic variation, and atmospheric conditions. These regions tested human capabilities while revealing nature's capacity for phenomena that defied easy explanation. The phantom convoy belonged to this extreme environment, emerging from conditions that combined factors in ways rarely encountered elsewhere. It might be unique to Arctic waters, or might represent general phenomenon most visible under extreme conditions. Either possibility suggested that human understanding of reality remained incomplete, that consensus scientific frameworks captured much but not all of what actually existed. As the 20th century ended and the 21st began, the phantom convoy remained what it had always been. Documented mystery, rigorously observed phenomenon lacking satisfactory explanation. Over 200 incidents recorded across 6 decades, witnessed by hundreds of qualified observers using progressively more sophisticated technology, corroborated across multiple nations and theoretical frameworks. The phenomenon was unquestionably real within any reasonable standard of evidence. Yet its nature remained obscure, resistant to explanation despite sustained investigation by intelligent, trained personnel equipped with advanced instruments. Perhaps future generations would solve the mystery, developing theoretical frameworks that made sense of observations that baffled 20th century investigators. Or perhaps the phantom convoy would remain permanently inexplicable, a reminder that reality exceeded human comprehension in ways both humbling and profound. Either outcome validated the investigation conducted during and after the Second World War. The phenomenon had been documented thoroughly, analyzed carefully, and preserved for future study. Whatever understanding might eventually emerge would build on foundation laid by Holloway, Kellner, Haskell, and others who refused to dismiss the inexplicable, who maintained that mystery deserved serious investigation even when explanation proved elusive. The Arctic seas continued their eternal patterns, ice forming and melting with seasons, storms sweeping across vast expanses, darkness alternating with midnight sun. Within this ancient rhythm, the phantom convoy maintained its presence, appearing briefly to those who traveled northern waters, vanishing before investigation could approach too closely, preserving its mystery across generations. Ships that existed and did not exist, formations that appeared on radar and to the human eye yet left no physical trace, vessels that demonstrated organization and purpose while remaining forever beyond reach or understanding. The phenomenon persisted, patient and indifferent, waiting perhaps for comprehension that current humanity could not provide, or simply existing as permanent feature of reality that required no explanation, needed no purpose, simply was and would continue being long after those who had documented it were forgotten.